Welcome back to Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom. I'm Brendan Davis, your host, and this week's guest is Allman Paul. Allman is a former Guitar World and later Wall Street Journal writer from, wait for it, Boston, who became a notable Beijing-based blues musician somehow. It all started when his wife got a job as the China bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal, and they moved their young family to Beijing to begin what became a 3-year adventure in the Middle Kingdom. In addition to Allman's musical highlights, in the episode we also discussed some of his other fond memories of his time living in China, especially bicycling on old back roads and discovering new places to eat, meeting local people, and the fun of making friends with people he'd never have met otherwise. But when Allman and his family left China, things got really cool. After they moved back to the U.S., Allman wrote a memoir called Big in China about his crazy musical experiences here, and he tells the story of how it all began, thanks to a broken guitar, a Chinese repairman who is also something of a secret musical wizard, and their shared love of Stevie Ray Vaughan. And on a strangely related note, Allman also has this huge connection to the legendary Southern rock group, the Allman Brothers Band, who I love, from writing about and interviewing them over a 25-year period for different magazines, publications, whatnot. Allman became something of an insider in their world, and we also talk about his best-selling Allman's book, the story of how he got that gig, which was in part because Allman Brothers drummer Butch Trucks discovered and had respect for Allman's China book, is pretty awesome. There's also a funny story about his Big in China book title and this very podcast that we discuss in the interview. Plus, there are lots of links to cool stuff in the show notes this week, even more than normal, so please be especially sure to take a look at those for this one. It was a really great talk. One technical note is that I edited around a record number of Skype gremlins in the first 15 minutes or so of the interview, but I truly think you can only hear 1 or 2 edits, maybe at most, and they don't break the story flow. And then after that, happily, we got lucky and we had 0 issues for the entire last half hour, so really enjoy this episode. Now, speaking of enjoying things, I am looking forward to enjoying a whole pile of my things that I've ordered back home in LA that I can't get here in China, like big boy jeans and dress shirts that actually fit my hefty American-sized frame, and those things are going to find their way to me here in Beijing thanks to our sponsor, Stackery. Stackery is the global leader in international parcel forwarding from the U.S. to anywhere in the world. The way it works is simple. You shop at any U.S. retailer, have your packages shipped to your Stackery address, and once everything has arrived, they consolidate your stuff and they ship it to you anywhere in the world, even China, saving you up to 80% of the shipping costs versus shipping things directly from the store. Stackery provides free storage, same-day consolidation of your packages, and a tax-free U.S. address for you to use in New Hampshire. Now, I'm building my very first Stackery shipment from the U.S. to China right now. Everything that's currently in my LA mailbox, plus an Amazon order that I'm finalizing this week, will soon be heading to the Stackery warehouse in New Hampshire, where they will do their packing consolidation magic and get it all moving towards me here in Beijing. I'll update you as my Stackery story continues, and it's really easy to use their site and get yours started too. Sign up today via the link in the show notes and use the offer code BIGFISH, that's all one word, BIGFISH, at the checkout to save 10% off your first shipment. One quick show note is that with any luck, my Stackery package might even be back here in Beijing before I will. I'm going to be on the road starting next week for a gig in Zhangzhou, and I'll be posting from the road for the next 3 weeks. Next week's show, plus another 1 or 2, should be in the can before I leave, but I will try to find some willing folks down there to interview as well to break out of my Beijing bubble a little bit. If I do, I might shuffle my posting schedule to accommodate interviews with any fish I happen to find in the actual middle of the Middle Kingdom down there. Lastly, for now, the Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom Facebook group has really been growing a lot lately, and the show is now also available on the Stitcher platform for listening to podcasts. Now, Apple Podcasts and iTunes downloads are still as important as ever, but I'd also really like to have a nice showing on Stitcher for our first few weeks there if possible, so please check out the Facebook group, also subscribe in Apple Podcasts and or Stitcher if you really want to help the show find new fans. It would mean a lot to me, and thank you in advance. Now, please enjoy my interview with Allman Paul. Well, I'm glad to be talking with Allman Paul on the Skype machine. Allman, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. I will have set this up in the intro a bit, but first of all, in your words, can you please tell the audience a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and for you, why China, and then we will unpack it.
Sure. My name's Allman Paul. I was in Beijing from 2005 to 2009. While I was there, much of the time there, I wrote a column for the Wall Street Journal called The Expat Life. And I did a lot of different things. I worked for NBC during the Olympics. And after years and years in decades really of being a music journalist, I pursued music as an avocation. I ended up forming a band called Woody Allen with one other American and primarily 3 Chinese bandmates. And we ended up recording a CD and touring all over the country. And I wrote a book about all those experiences called Big in China. Um, and that's probably my relevance to your podcast. And I've done all kinds of other things since I've been back.
Absolutely. It's funny. I talked to you when I reached out to you in the first place because, a lot of my guests I know, I would say at this point, actually, about a third of the guests I know really well. A third of the guests I'm kind of acquainted with. And then a third of the people are people like you who I don't know at all, but I reach out and we dig deep. We might find some common friends among my friends who are old China hands, who you might have known in Beijing. But the way that I discovered you was that when I had the idea for this podcast, which I'd been thinking about it for a while, and I brainstormed what I thought would be the perfect title, and it hit me, Big in China. That's what I want to do. And I had not heard of your book yet. And so when I did my research, as you do, to see who else, if anyone's used this title, I discovered The World of Allman Paul. And I was disappointed I wouldn't use that title, but I thought what you were doing is really interesting and cool. And people who listen to the show know that I am also kind of a failed rock star as my first career. So all of your music adventures are something that I relate to also. So I guess where I should start with you is what brought you to China in the first place?
Well, I came to China really when my wife was offered the job of Wall Street Journal China bureau chief. I had been working for about 10 years on a freelance writer contract as a senior writer for Guitar World and Slam magazines. And I got a little bit frustrated. I was a little stale. Okay. I had told my wife that I wouldn't move from our home in Maplewood, New Jersey, because we had 3 young kids and I had a pretty good system of balance here. She worked a lot of hours. I was able to have a lot of help so I could keep working and doing stuff I liked. So I had really discouraged her from pursuing jobs in San Francisco and Washington, 1 or 2 others. And so she didn't even mention the Beijing job when it came up because she assumed that it was something I would absolutely not do. But I heard her discussing it with a friend, not really as something she might do, but just as like, well, there's always something. In fact, there even was a job in Beijing, and I just kind of jumped on it and said, I would do that. And she was shocked, and I was a little bit shocked, too. It was really just an instinct, and I just felt that giving up this sort of stable thing that we had established here for San Francisco or Washington or something just wasn't worth it. But for China, it was worth taking a shot at it. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know really anything that much about China. I wasn't a China hand. I hadn't studied the country. I hadn't studied the language. I just like Chinese food and I like Chinese people.
Okay, sure.
But I really didn't have any real depth of knowledge or thought about it, to be honest. It's just that, I had such a strong sense I wanted to have an adventure, basically. And I understood that China was of growing importance. And my basic attitude was, it probably will be great. And if it's terrible, worst case scenario, and I hate it there, I still will come back better, smarter, stronger, more equipped for the world. So it just seemed like, why not?
That is a pretty great perspective.
Her to go for the job, and she did, and she got the job. Long story short, and so we moved.
Awesome. What can you remember about? We won't do too much retrospective of your first, fresh off the boat. But what was your impression when you landed? Once you kind of got a sense of things.
Well, the thing is that we had a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old, I think, or 7-year-old, and so I didn't know what I would be doing over there. Wall Street Journal at the time owned a house for the bureau chiefs in Beijing Riviera, which is nice. outside the Fifth Ring Road. It's everyone calls it Shunyi. It's actually Chaoyang, but it's in the Shunyi area, so might as well be. And so I didn't know whether that was good or bad. It made it a little more comfortable and easier to go and initially, and more importantly, it just removed the whole decision. We didn't have to look for a house. There was really no decision. That's where we were going to move. And given our situation with these little kids, that was important. Part of what happened when we got there is that I was sort of blown away. I didn't. Not only did I not know much about China, I really didn't know much about this whole expat existence. So I didn't realize that there was this whole giant ecosystem of expats.
Yeah.
And so sort of blown away by that and by the fact that we were entering. I mean, I knew we were entering a foreign culture in terms of going to China. I didn't realize that we were sort of entering two foreign cultures, which was also the expat world. And, that in the expat world, I was a quote unquote trailing spouse.
Right.
It's just a crazy thing. I mean, I'd never heard that term before, and I found it really demeaning.
Sure. It doesn't sound like something you want on your business card.
But I just loved being out there. I just loved it. So I bought a bike, and I just started riding around. Kids got settled in faster than I thought they would. We found our way around this expat community. I was a little bit horrified at first about living in this expat compound, and I remained somewhat ambivalent about it throughout our whole time there. But there were really nice parts about it, and one of the nice parts about it is that there were just a great group of people there. There were plenty of particularly care for, but it was like being at a big high school or college or something. You just don't associate with the people you don't want to associate with,
right.
And you find the people that you like, and the people that we did like there, I thought were just excellent people, just really high quality people who were fun, interesting, doing all different kinds of things. And I like the fact that everybody lived the sort of same, I called it a fake rich lifestyle.
Yeah.
Everyone had drivers and these big houses and IEs and stuff. And some people reveled in that more than others, some too much, in my opinion. But the point is that there was a sort of equality there. So people working for an NGO and people who were like partners at, Goldman Sachs there and journalists, we all sort of lived the same lifestyle, and it didn't really matter.
Right.
You found people you liked and people you didn't like. And, I just thrust myself into that. But I decided immediately I wasn't going to be limited by that, because I also saw definitely disadvantages in people who never left that compound on weekends and stuff. And that just seemed completely bonkers to me. And my initial feelings, which I think were absolutely borne out more and more over the years as I knew more, were that the people who struggled the most there were people who were trying to recreate home
exactly
much as they could. Yep. They would always be dissatisfied. You can't do that. Versus the people who just embraced where they were. So I said I got a bike really early, like in my first few days, and I just started riding it. And one of the cool things about being out where we lived at the time, and this is not so much the case anymore, just really about a year or two after we left, it changed quite radically. We were still on the edge of the countryside. Okay. So I would ride my bike out and just start riding out into countryside and ride through water lily, fields and fields of corn, and farmers out drying their corn crop on the street in the fall. And I'd ride my bike into little villages and go eat and just go with my camera and take pictures and drink tea and, give impromptu English lessons to waitresses in these little villages and, get a bowl of noodles for, 2 kwai. And I mean, I just loved that. And there was this sort of dirty big market right down the street from our house where I realized, a lot of expats who lived there for years never went. And I just love doing that. I started having sort of one foot in each world, a foot in this sort of cushy expat world and a foot in this sort of really dirty, world out there in the villages. And I just liked it. And I found it fascinating and really interesting. And a lot of the things that made living out in that part of Beijing attractive to me or interesting to me are really no longer the case. So people who weren't in Beijing at that time probably think I'm crazy to talk about that area that way.
Right.
But one thing that that everyone knows who lives in Beijing is that how fast it changes.
Completely.
Because of course There were many people I would talk to when I was there who said, "Oh, 2 years ago this was really in the country," and it still felt like the edge of the country to me then. But that's just life in Beijing. So.
Absolutely. Well, I want to find out, in your own words. I of course know your story here a bit, but how did you become big in China? What's the path from curious new resident cutting to your immersion in the
Right.
world of music here? I mean, it's a hell of a story. I know you've told it a lot, but I'm interested,
Yeah.
for the how you like
Well,
to share
no,
that
of
with folks.
course. Well, there's a few things. I mean, let me just say first a little bit about the title "Big in China." It was actually when I began, it was really a joke to myself. When I started writing book proposal, I called it my "Big in China" proposal, and it really was a joke. I didn't take it too seriously. But when I was getting ready to really finish and make my pitch, I couldn't come up with a name I liked more. And I really tried, actually, really, really tried. And so when I went in and had a meeting with my editor at HarperCollins, when I was trying to sell the book, I said,
Mhm.
listen, one thing I need to tell you is Big in China is a working title. I just haven't come up with the perfect one yet. And she said to me, no, the title's Big in China. I love it. That's why you're sitting in my office right now. So
Yeah. It's pretty
I was like,
catchy,
oh,
and yeah, it's pretty catchy. It's
okay, never mind. That's cool. So I actually can now call my band Big in China here because I had spent, I started it right when the book was coming out. I spent so much time trying to market the book title. I didn't want to start over
yeah,
again.
exactly.
So the name was kind of a joke, but it was partly certainly about the band. And it's not because we were such a big band. Okay, we weren't. By Chinese standards, you could say we barely existed, right? I mean, but we, compared to my vision of what I might ever do as a musician, it was just, a giant leap for me. I
Sure,
mean,
sure.
we recorded CD, we signed to a label, we played all over China, we headlined beach festival in Xiamen, which was sort of the biggest place we played, which probably was about 6,000 people, and
Hmm.
it was broadcast on TV down there throughout the province. We were on radio and TV shows all over the place when we went on tour, and places like Hangzhou and Changsha. So, yeah, I mean, the band exceeded my wildest expectations of what I could do as a musician. Um, so did a lot of other things that I did in China. The column that I wrote, Expat Life, ended up winning an award as the columnist of the year from the National Society of Newspaper Columnists, and I had advanced that from a guy who wrote for Guitar World and Slam magazine, and had some growing sense of frustration that I should be doing more, but I wasn't. And you know, all of these things that I had sort of envisioned and dreamed about, and some things that I hadn't even taken the dare to dream about, really happened in China. And to this day, it's hard for me to completely understand or explain how or why it happened. But motto during the time came from a BB King song, which was "You better not look down if you want to keep on flying."
Nice, nice.
Well, ongoing, especially, I really tried not to analyze very much, but to keep going. Keep one in front of the other and keep moving.
What would you say was the impetus for you to have the confidence to do the band? I mean, you have this, in your own words, as I've read from other interviews. I mean, obviously you're a music journalist and a big music head, and quite a good, non-professional musician up to that point. What was it that made you think, hey, I'm going to start a band?
Well, it really was as simple as this. Before I went to China, I decided I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I don't have to work nearly as much, and I wasn't sure if I'd be working at all initially. And I'm going to play a lot of music. I'm going to just spend some time on my guitar and get my chops together. And the first year I was there, I didn't really do much of that at all. I played a little bit, but very little. And so I came home over the summer after that first year, and I was a little disappointed with myself on that front, although it had been just a fantastic year in many other ways, including the column and just having fun and learning Chinese, and my kids, seeing them thrive. Yeah, so I had these great jam sessions while I was home over the summer, and I bought a new guitar to inspire myself, a copy of a Gibson 335, and I brought it back to China, and I was so excited. And I opened up my case back at my office in Beijing, and the headstock was cracked off.
Oh
It had broken.
no, no.
So I was really bummed out. So I just kind of shoved it in back in the case and threw it under my desk for a while until I was ready to deal with it for a couple weeks later. And then I talked to some, real guitar guy friends, and they told me that it was really fixable.
Yeah.
But you needed to have a good luthier. So, okay, I need a good luthier. So I started looking for one, and a bunch of guys who I knew would know recommended a young Chinese guy named Woody Wu. So I emailed Woody. He had a guitar repair company and sales company called Purple Buzz. I emailed him, and wanting to make sure I got some decent attention so far from home, I dropped the Guitar World thing in there, which is what I've been doing for years. And I always avoided that in guitar stores because I would find it kind of embarrassing because I don't play like shreddy type guitar.
You're not Ingve. You're saying you're not Ingve?
Yeah. And then in the day, especially, that's what people would sort of expect from me. So I would usually avoid that. But, in this case, I was in China and I really wanted to get service. So I mentioned it to Woody, and he wrote me back and said, hey, I looked you up online, and, you've interviewed so many of my favorite musicians. I'd be honored to fix your guitar. Okay, great. Awesome. That's cool. That worked. So we made a plan to go, to meet. And I went down there, and I didn't know really anything else about Woody. And he met me. He met my cab at the building where his office was, and he came out, and he was just like young guy. He's about 12 years younger than me. Really long hair. He's wearing these aviator shades. He had a bunch of earrings. He had a nose ring. A wallet attached with the chain.
Yeah.
Cool.
Rock and roll guy.
Took me out. Yeah, a real rock and roll guy. And so I kind of assumed by his age and by the fact that, metal really was pretty popular in China, that he was a metal guy. And I'd done plenty of metal writing for Guitar World. I mean, it was my main gig for 10 years. So I did whatever I needed to do. I did lots of stuff on Metallica and Megadeth and other people, even though that wasn't really where my passion or interest lie.
Right.
Well, eventually Woody took his jean jacket off as we were talking, and I saw a familiar face on his arm, and I kind of asked him to pull his sleeve up more so I could see it. And he had a big tattoo of Stevie Ray Vaughan on his left arm.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was just amazing to me. And that was actually the stuff that he had that made him interested in me. I wrote the liner notes on a Stevie Ray Vaughan box set.
Oh, no kidding.
Oh, wow. He had found that online. And that's what, so, from my perspective, I'm like, oh my God, I did all this writing in my office in New Jersey. I never know if anyone's even paying attention to what I do. And it turns out to be this door opener in Beijing, of all places, to meeting this great young guy, which was so cool. And from his perspective, he's sitting in his office in Beijing, and the guy who wrote the liner notes to, the record, the CD, the box set of his favorite musician pops up and says he wants him to fix a guitar. So it was a really cool meeting for both of us,
Yeah.
And so long story short, we talked about getting together and going out, and I just thought that he might be a really nice guy to the music scene in Beijing. I just thought he'd be a buddy to take me out to some clubs and meet musicians and stuff.
Sure.
He was playing with a band called Sand, which is really a pretty good band. And when it was ready, he texted me and told me the guitar was ready. And he said, I'm playing a gig tomorrow night. Would you like to pick it up there and come check us out? So I said, sure, that'd be great. So I did that, and I said hi to him, and he showed me the guitar, and it looked great. And I asked him how much I owed him, and he said, oh, there's a bill in the case. Don't worry about it. Pay me whenever, which right away was also really different. In China, how much stuff is usually cash on the barrelhead.
Right.
Was. Now it's,
now it's WeChat on the barrelhead. Yeah.
Yeah. But, so I was like, wow, this guy's different. So I played the guitar a little, and then the band leader asked me if I'd like to jam with them. And I said, sure, and I was a little nervous, but I thought, well, that would be fun. So he called me up, and I played a couple songs, and that was fun. And then I just sat down, and I just played guitar along with them. And I've done lots of stuff like that before, sitting in with my friends' bands
Sure.
for a couple songs. I sat back down, I was having a beer, and then he came out later and he introduced me, in Chinese, and said that they're a very special guest in the house, a very important American rock journalist. And I
Oh,
thought, oh boy,
nice.
this is nice. It's kind of embarrassing, kind of funny, but okay. So I waved and whatever. And then he said something else that I didn't understand in Chinese. And everyone started clapping. And then I realized that he was calling me up and leaving and turning the band over.
Oh no. Okay.
And I had a little bit of a, fight or flight reaction. I mean, part of me felt like getting up and running out the door. And if my guitar hadn't been left on the stage, I mean, I may have done it. If I had taken the guitar with me.
Yeah, if you were packed up and ready to go, you might have.
I went up there and I didn't know what to do. And so I just kind of thought of some songs and called them out, like trying to keep it relatively simple, repetitive
Right.
chord structures and stuff. And I played like 3 songs with them, and I was just basically happy. I had fun, and I was just happy that I didn't embarrass myself, really.
Yeah.
And afterwards, Woody told me how much he enjoyed it. He said, "I thought you were a great singer, and I'd be happy to play with you again. Let's do something."
Oh, cool.
And so, yeah, I was like really flattered. And I thought, well, okay, this guy, he was great. I mean, he was playing lap steel guitar, instrument I love.
Wow.
Which is like
that is no joke. That's a hard thing to play well.
Yeah, it is a hard thing to play, but even more so, it's an unusual thing to play.
Totally.
And the fact that's where his interests lie I was like,
you thought he was a metal guy when you first met him, and just because of his package.
And he's not only a great musician, but he's an interesting musician, and he plays the kind of music I really love and I'm really interested in. So, I thought, well, I got to do this. And, there was a club, a restaurant really out near my house called The Orchard. And the owner out there was a friend of mine. And
I know where that is.
Bugging me to be, it was owned by a couple who have since gotten divorced. And so she's no longer there. Her husband now owns it. But she had been bugging me to host an open mic night there, and I wasn't quite, because I had sat in with a couple of bands there, and she'd seen me play and like me, but I wasn't comfortable as a solo person doing that. I didn't have enough confidence.
Yeah.
But when Woody said he wanted to play with me, I called her up and said I would do it, and so we made a plan, and that was really my plan. Was like, wow, if we can play open mics or some acoustic duo gigs once a month, that would be really fun. That would be super cool with this like awesome Chinese lap steel player who's going to show me and introduce me to all kinds of cool people and musical things. That was sort of the height of my ambition at that point, just to pull off like an hour set with him and become his buddy.
Yeah, totally.
That's sort of all I was thinking.
That's a great goal, make a friend in the new place, and
yeah, exactly, and entree into a world that I really wouldn't otherwise have easy access to. These Chinese musicians and music clubs happening that I wouldn't have otherwise found. So we did that, and I invited like everyone I could think of, and the name once again was sort of a joke. Woody Allen. His name was Woody. My name is Allen.
Yeah.
There's another thing where I tried to come up with a good name, and I couldn't. And I just kind of realized that Woody Allen was just sitting there.
Yeah, it's there for the taking.
There for the taking. I had to use it. And if I had ever realized how far we were going to end up trying to take this thing, I probably would have used a different name, but I'm really glad I didn't, because it got people's attention. It was funny. It declared that we weren't too serious. And but and for the expats and the Chinese people, some of the younger, more intellectual people kind of got that joke, and others just took it like super, super literally. It's the Woody and Allen band.
Sure. So it works. It works both ways. So that's good.
Yeah. So, and then we just sort of started going for it, and we made a little run for it, and we took it much, much further than I ever thought possible. We kicked around as a duo. We added a friend of mine, Dave Levinger, who's, obviously another American guy who worked for the Treasury Department. he's a saxophone player,
Mm-hmm.
and we added a bass player. Woody brought in an upright bass player who had played in that band Sand that I played with the first night.
Right.
Then we brought an African percussion player in at one point who I knew who worked at my kids' school, did that. And eventually we cycled through a few people. And after a few months, Woody ended up bringing in this drummer named Lu Wei and a bass player named Zhang Yang. And they were really, really great musicians. And that was the moment where it turned into something of, really being a band.
Yeah. That's when you knew you had it. And
Yeah.
and you've written. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please.
No, again, I was just thrilled that those guys wanted to play with me. I mean, and so in terms of having confidence, you asked how I had the confidence to do it. To some extent, I didn't, but I was so excited about it that the confidence just came from, I have to do this. I have to pursue it and not be afraid of failing, because if I fail, then I fail. It will be a funny story too. It's just like I said about moving to China. If I hate it, I'll still be smarter and better, and I'll have good stories to tell. And good stories to tell are worth a lot. So, that's what I always how I always try to think of it when I'm scared of doing something.
I think that's an awesome approach, and I have not actually been able to read the book, but you let me know that it's available. Big in China is available on Kindle. And not in hardback anymore, as I understand it. But is paperback available, or is it totally ebook now,
no,
electronic now?
There's no print copy easily available, but it is of course available on Kindle, and it's also available in an audiobook, which I read myself,
Oh,
and
cool.
which includes some snippets of the music. I was able to put in there, so I'm very fond of that. I would love for anyone to listen to the audiobook and let me know what you think.
Well, and we're not done yet, but I'm definitely going to include. I'll get links from you so I can put those in the show notes so that we can make sure it's really easy for people to find both of those. I want to talk a little bit about what has it been like, moving back to the States. I mean, you were here, I think you said 3.5 years, but then you've been back and forth a bit. So what has it been like for you? Kind of repatriating, and what's been your process? What's it been like? Was it hard for you to get back in the groove of the States, or was it like putting on an old pair of shoes?
Well, I've been back for about 9 years,
Right.
And yes, it was hard to get back. Honestly, I mean, it's been long enough now that it's easy to gloss over. But in truth, it was difficult. I mean, I walked away from a lot. The band was sort of at its peak. I had this column that was really happening. I loved day-to-day life. Like, I loved how I could go outside and get on my bike or get in my car eventually when I started driving there, and just find something funky and interesting and fun so fast. So, I gave up all that. It was difficult. It wasn't like I was crying or people were mean to me here. I mean, I had great friends and family who found my travels interesting, but it was really hard. And I threw myself, after about 6 months, into writing Big in China. So the book really, in some ways, it's hard to explain, but it sort of saved me. And I just, I don't mean to be overly dramatic, but in terms of my mental and emotional health, it really did, because it gave me a way to relive my experience, but in a way that was productive and not just wallowing and reliving.
Right. Right.
And so that was really important. That was really great for me. For the first few years, I was going back and forth quite a bit. In the time from when I wrote the book until when it came out, Woody Woo, my band partner, went through a difficult personal time and sort of dropped out. And so I lost all contact with him. And that was really, really bewildering to me and a bit difficult. We had a lot of plans. I mean, I had worked and been able to get him a visa to come here. And, the plan all along was that he would come here for the release of the book, and we were going to
do some shows.
Yeah, we're going to do some shows, and we were going to play acoustic at book readings. And, I was doing, there was a fair amount of interest in my story, thankfully. So I did a lot of interviews, which was great. But I mean, my plan was to have him in the interviews with me. And so there was an element of the rush of the book coming out and the at least modest success of the book that was a little hard for me to fully process or appreciate because I had this sadness. And he ended up sort of staying um, somewhat underground. I mean, I sort of knew where he was, but he'd made it clear he didn't want to talk. And it wasn't personal to me. He had dropped out from all his friends, all the musicians, all the band, for about 7 years. And last year, in May, just out of the blue, really, he popped back up again. I had just decided I should leave him alone and not even try to get in touch. And I was going over because my oldest son had an internship in Hong Kong last year. And so I decided to take him there and to go to Beijing with him on our way and have a nice visit with some of our friends who were still there. And so I got in touch with all the band guys and just let them know I was coming, just in, hoping we could get together. And not expecting to hear from him at all. And long story short, he popped up, and next thing I know, I'm talking to him on WeChat. We had a really, really nice talk. And he and Zhang Yang, bass player, have both ended up moving to Xiamen.
Okay.
Which was where we had our moment of greatest triumph headlining the beach festival.
Yeah.
And it's not unrelated to how they ended up there. Zhang Yang ended up going into business with the promoters, and he owns a couple of clubs down there with
sweet.
Them. And Woody ended up getting married to this woman who worked for the promoter at the time, and she's from Xiamen, and her family is there, so he moved back down with her. So it's really interesting. And then Lue, the drummer, is still in Beijing, but he's become a really big star. He's the drummer in the Voice of China house band.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah, that's a huge show. And that band's killer.
Know. I mean, I show his picture to people here, like Chinese people, and they all get excited. I mean, people actually know him.
Sure.
And he plays with really big pop stars whose names I don't know. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But he's like the go-to guy. He's like the go-to.
He plays arenas. He's played the Bird's Nest a bunch of times. He does basically every year.
Yeah.
I'm really, really happy for him. And I mentioned this in the book in Big in China, but he always carried himself like a star. We used to joke that we were the only band that didn't have a drummer, didn't have a manager, but our drummer did. He didn't have any money, but he had a manager, like a personal assistant. He had drum techs wherever we went, like when we went on tour, because he did online drum lessons, and that were pretty popular.
He had a big network.
Yeah, he had a network. So wherever we would show up, we'd be on tour in Changsha and come into our hotel lobby, and there's some dude waiting to carry our guitars. We'd have roadies everywhere we went because of him. It was 100% because of him. These kids would come set up his drums. So he always carried a driver, even when he had no money. So he carried himself like a star, and now he's a star. So I love that. And he is a great drummer, so he deserves it on that level. But I also do feel like he sort of created his own reality and then made it reality. So I think it's pretty cool. So I'm happy for him, and I'm really, really happy to be in touch with these guys again. And it opens up a lot of possibilities and ideas about going back and forth to China, which I'm happy about as well, because I still love it there. I still feel really, really comfortable there.
What do you think is sort of next on the horizon for you musically, whether it's this band or something else?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I've done in the last couple of years is I wrote a history of the Allman Brothers called One Way Out.
Sure.
And that ended up doing really well. And the book, I don't know if I ever would have done if it hadn't been for writing Big in China. And, in my work as a music journalist, I think really got deeper and better and more interesting from my experience as a musician in China. So part of what I do now is I have my band Big in China that plays around New Jersey where I live. And then I also have a band called Friends of the Brothers, which is basically an Allman Brothers tribute band. But everyone in the band has some association with the band. So,
right. Let's talk about the brothers for a minute. We spoke briefly in our back and forth. I won't get into it now. I have a couple of weird associations with them through friends and family myself. So that's a funny thing that's been a big part of your life. But yeah, let's talk about the Allmans for a minute. Let's not rush through it.
Sure. Well, I loved the Allman Brothers going back to when I was a kid. Okay. So it starts way back there. They were one of the first bands that really, lit me on fire, thanks to my brother, who I dedicated One Way Out to, because he's 5 years older than me. And when I was about 11 or 12, he handed me a copy of Eat a Peach and said, listen to this.
Nice.
And then let me use his stereo, man, which was a big deal in the 70s.
That's a good big brother. He did the right thing.
That's right. Yes, I sat for hours on his yellow shag carpet listening to Eat a Peach, and I was just completely transfixed. So then when I ended up, working as a music journalist, I pursued writing about the Allman Brothers, and I did for years, and I became really close with some of them. Wrote tons of articles for Guitar World and some other people. I became friendly with their management, really good friends with the road manager, which got me out on the road with them and able to go to shows and meet the crew. And, and these kind of guys, like Dickie Betts and Greg Allman, they were pretty guarded. These are guys who were burned a lot of times over the years. So it would be kind of crazy to say I'm going to put 25 years into writing a book. But if you don't put in 25 years, like, they're not going to really open up to you and trust you.
Right.
As crazy as that sort of sounds. So I wasn't exactly writing a book for 25 years, but I was working, writing about them and establishing these relationships for that long. And I sort of thought I was done with it after China. But when I came back, it was getting close to their 40th anniversary in 2009. And editor of Guitar World called me up and asked me to do a cover story. So I did that, and that was great. And it plunged me completely back into that world. And that ended up becoming the basis, or the starting off, the jumping off point for what became One Way Out.
What has been what's been some of the reaction to the book? I mean, I know it's been a big hit and everything, but what has been sort of the personal juice you've gotten from this?
The book came out in March of 2014, or February 2014. March of 2014 was the Allman Brothers' 45th anniversary, and they were going to be doing their annual shows at the Beacon Theater in New York. And leading up to it, there was a series of crazy things happened, and they suddenly announced that Derek Trucks and Warren Haynes, guitar players, were going to be leaving at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. So it was going to be the last go-round for this group that had been together in this iteration for 17 years. So I got really lucky. I was really sad about that news.
Sure.
It was also, like, from my book perspective, incredible news,
right?
Because the Allman Brothers were suddenly newsworthy. I mean, they had been a very steady and popular thing, but not particularly newsworthy or, headline worthy, or bands that, your mother or your cousin or something, were paying attention to. And that suddenly was the case. So that was good for me. I somehow managed to maintain relationships with most of the guys in the band, despite writing the book, or because of writing the book. Mm-hmm. And so when those final shows came, I was at all of them. And so I became sort of the inside chronicler of the Allman Brothers. I mean, I already was with the book, and I almost became even more so after the book. And so for about 2 years, that just completely dominated my, my life, really. And I will say one other thing, that the Big in China thing also really opened up some doors with the Allman Brothers in a crazy way, because I was friends with these guys who ran an Allman Brothers fanzine, Hitting the Note. And, which became a pretty decent sized magazine that was on newsstands and stuff. And so when the book was coming out, I got them to print an excerpt of it about my experience of turning my Chinese bandmates onto the Allman Brothers, which changed the whole nature of our band. It was really a profound thing. And I have an excerpt of that up on my blog, allanpaul.net, which I'll highlight again now so anybody who goes up easily, which would be great. But Butch Trucks, the drummer in the Allman Brothers, actually read Hitting the Note, and he read my excerpt about turning my Chinese bandmates on, and he called me up. He got my number from the manager and called me completely out of the blue. I get a phone call from Butch Trucks. my relationship with the band was really originally with the guitar players because I came at it from Guitar World.
Right.
So I was good friends, or not good friends, but close professionally with Dickie Betts, with Warren Haynes,
Sure.
later with Derek Trucks, and with all of these guys. And then I got to know Greg because Greg was, of course, really important to the whole thing. So I interviewed Greg a bunch of times, but I really didn't know the drummers. Okay.
Yeah.
And
okay.
the Big in China experience just brought me in with Butch. He loved it. And he called me up and wanted to talk about it. And I said, Butch, give me your address and I'll send you a book. And he said, I already bought it.
Nice.
That was, really flattering, but also really revealing about Butch and the kind of guy he was. He was a guy who led with his passion, and he, was interested in the book. So he did what, probably you or I would do, went on Amazon and bought it the minute he read about it. And he did read it and he loved it. And I talked to him about it at length. And again, it was not only really flattering, but ultimately, about a year or two later, when I started to write One Way Out, Butch was a huge source. He was really all in.
Oh, cool.
And he was excited I was doing it because he had read Big in China.
Nice.
And he had respect for what I had done and for my writing. And he treated me as an author and as someone who had sort of done cool things, rather than just, a guy from Guitar World writing a book.
Yeah, not someone just to be tolerated because but somebody to be embraced and respected.
So the China thing, really paid off in ways there that I never would have expected. I mean, that was beyond my wildest dreams.
That is a awesome story. I'm glad to hear that had that impact on it. What would you like to drive people to? Where I'll include the links, of course, in your website. What's currently happening for you? What would you like to kind of leave everybody with as we wrap it up?
I'm working really hard to finish a biography of Stevie Ray Vaughan for St. Martin's Press, and the same people and the same editor who did One Way Out. I'm plugging away on that. I have a really active Facebook page at facebook.com/Allman Paul author, where I post, all of my music stuff. Originally posted a lot of China stuff, and I still post China stuff there as well. But it's been lots of Allman Brothers, lots of my own music, and now lots and lots of Stevie Ray Vaughan. Sometimes a mix of all those things. Ultimate thing is my Chinese band playing Allman Brothers or Stevie Ray Vaughan cover. It ties it all together.
Fun. Well, Alan, I really appreciate you getting on the call, and we had some Skype gremlins that I will have edited around at the beginning of this, but this was really great, man. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Thanks for your interest. It's always fun to talk. So appreciate it, and maybe we can meet up next time I'm in Beijing.
Absolutely, man. I'll bring my guitar.
Okay, sounds great, man.
All right, that's the show this week. Don't forget you can find links to all the cool things Alan talked about in the interview, plus the links to Stitcher, Apple Podcast, iTunes, and the Stackery offer with the offer code BIGFISH, all in the show notes. The blog is at crazyinagoodway.com. Thank you again for listening, and I will see you next week.